To answer why I write epic heroic fantasy, I will have to tell you a long story, but I promise there will be some surprises in here, things that I'm sure you did not expect at all. So let's start at the beginning. Since I was young, I have been in love with fantasy, science fiction and superheroes, and it never mattered much to me whether I found those stories in books, comics, TV, movies or games. I loved them all. Though a lot has happened to change those genres through my life, I'm still very much in love, and I don't mind that there's plots that's gotten more gritty or mature. For example, in my youth in the 1970s and 80s, main characters very seldom died, but these days you can kill or maim whoever, whenever. Don't get me wrong, I also liked it the way it was back then. It had its own charm and made it easy for new fans to jump on board anytime in a series and quickly understand what was going on. Any one story with Superman or any one episode of Star Trek could generally be watched without much regard for all the previous stories. I do not kill or maim the main character left and right, but on the other side, people do get hurt in my book, and I start out, book one by basically killing everybody in several kingdoms and an empire. So at least to my thinking, I have positioned my story in a more modern context, but definitely based in the style of the stories I grew up with. But it all depends on how you view things, I suppose. Also, I tend to be very besmirched by my main characters, so I hurt when they hurt. When I was a teenager, I was sure I would become a comic book artist or a writer of comic books. I amassed a giant collection of 8,000 comic books. I spent every dime I could get my gritty little paws on, and one of my favorite moments were when I went to the local kiosk and bought the latest American, French or Belgian comic books or albums. I loved bringing those gems home, opening them and let the stories and drawings sweep me away. This all changed when I was 16 and got to participate in a workshop for budding artists. Here I met actual, for real, comic artists. And wow, there were people there who had drawn some of the comics I read and loved. I seriously looked up to these artists, and in my eye, they were fantastic. So imagine how shocked I was when I found out that most of them made little money. Some even lived most of their life on welfare. I did not understand this at all. To me, they should have high-paying jobs. I also realized that what chance did I have? A kid, obviously not as accomplished as any of them. So right after the workshop, I gave it a lot of thought, and then I basically gave up that dream and decided to go out and find a real job, like my parents. And many times through my life, like a gazillion times or so, I thought about being a writer. But I always had the feeling that if even the pros made no money, how would I survive? So eventually I became a journalist. That way I could still write, I could shoot short video pieces and earned a decent living. It was a good compromise. Also, when I decided that what I really wanted to do was not comics but writing books, I always thought I lacked the discipline to finish anything at large as complex as a book, so journalism was good. At first I worked with print and TV, and then I fell in love with the internet, and then ended up working communication jobs for large corporations. After working for many years in well-paying jobs for both small and large corporations, some of them you have probably heard about, such as Carlsberg and Microsoft, I then got very sick. One day I could not get out of bed. My body and my mind did not want to do what I wanted them to do. As it turned out, I had worked so hard for so long, and I've tried to fit into the role as a good corporate employee. At the same time, I had lost all my dreams. And I think this combination of hard work and losing my dream was poison for my mind, leading to permanent stress. So I decided to get back to the things I love, to reclaim my lost dream of becoming a writer. And so 3 days after losing my job, I started to write my first book, and I have not looked back since. It's funny really how the best things in life happen to you after or around the same time when something really bad happens. At least it seems so to me. Back to the original question of why I ended up writing the style of fantasy I do. Well, it's because I had so many good hours of reading the works of fantastic writers such as Tolkien, Lewis, Feist, Jordan, Weeks and Rothfuss. And I wanted to give my take on how a contemporary fantasy epic series could be done and discover my own style. Two other reasons are I wanted to give something back by creating stories and not only consume stories made by others. So instead of being a consumer only, and don't get me wrong there's nothing wrong with that, I just felt that I needed to live out my dream and create something for a change. And the second reason is that fantasy seems freer to me than my other great love, science fiction. I think that if my first book would have been a sci-fi story, I would have spent endless hours trying to figure out how the future technology should and could work. And to do that, believing, in a believable way, that seemed really difficult to me, much more difficult than writing fantasy stories. So I decided to begin there. I really want to write other genres too, and especially science fiction, and I have several ideas for cool stories, but for now I'm sticking with fantasy. You might also ask, why not do comic? Well, for reasons, the reason why my first published story is not a comic book is because I stopped reading a lot of comics. But I never stopped reading books, so I just feel more at home with books these days.